Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want you to think back to your very first job. So think back to when you were a teenager and think back to your very first job. Maybe it was at McDonald's or another fast food place. Maybe you were a cashier at a grocery store or babysitting or camp counselor or, like me, washing cars at a car dealership, cutting grass, painting houses. And 2 out of my 3 daughters worked summers at the local ice cream shop that's about a mile from my house. And I used to joke with them that by the end of summer, their right bicep was noticeably bigger than the left because of all of the scooping of this rock hard ice cream with their right arm all summer long. So I've taken you back in time to your first job, and now I want you to think about your first boss. So was that boss kind of grumpy and short-tempered and kind of mean, or was your first boss kind and encouraging and patient? So we all have had a lot of bosses in our lives, and there are a lot of bosses in the world, and there are also a lot of leaders in this world, but there is a big difference between being a boss and being a leader. And so on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we are going to discuss why bosses make you feel anxious, but leaders make you feel safe. And before we jump into that, if you're listening to this in real time in June, maybe you have a couple more minutes of time on your hands. And so I want to give you a couple of free gifts that are full of strategies that can help you have a better school year starting this fall. And this one is called 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. We know that working with parents is part of the job. And most of our parents are great, but some of them can be very demanding and emotional and difficult. And so this is a PDF guide that will give you the tools you need to build better relationships and have better meetings with the difficult parents at your school. So if you go to theprivateschooleader.com/parents, you can grab that guide for free. That's the 5 strategies to help you work with difficult parents, theprivateschooleader.com/parents. And that's just a way of saying thank you for listening every week. And then I want to give you another free gift, and this one is called The 4 Worst Things Parents Believe About Your School and How to Change Their Minds. And I don't know about you, but I get really, really frustrated when parents believe things about my school that aren't true. It gets really just infuriating and discouraging. And the problem is that oftentimes parent perception is reality. Well, I've created a PDF guide for you that will talk about the 4 super problematic things that parents believe about your school, but most importantly, I'm going to teach you how to change their minds. So you can grab this at theprivateschooleader.com/believe. That's theprivateschooleader.com/believe to get this PDF that is the 4 worst things parents believe about your school and how to change their minds. And then finally, before we jump in today's topic, I just want to let you know that over the past month that a bunch of school leaders have purchased Parent Academy as they are planning to use it as part of Teacher in Service at the end of summer. And Parent Academy has 2 45-minute webinars that are teacher PDs. There's a 27-page printable notebook with guided notes and discussion questions, and you can make this part of your teacher PD. And it's going to be a step-by-step framework that will help you and your teachers go from feeling stressed and anxious to feeling confident and calm. And so you can check that out at theprivateschooleader.com/Parent Academy. And basically, I've taken everything that I've learned about building successful relationships with thousands of parents over the last 33 years, packaged that knowledge into an online course. And the first 4 modules I teach you, and then I teach your teachers in the 2 plug-and-play PDs. So if that's something you want to learn more about, go to theprivateschooleader.com/Parent Academy. Okay, so I said at the top of the episode, bosses make you feel anxious, leaders make you feel safe. And this quote has been attributed to Simon Sinek. And if you've listened to the podcast for any length of time, you know that I'm a big Simon Sinek fan. And he has the second most watched TED Talk of all time, almost 70 million views, on how great leaders inspire change. And the Golden Circle and Start With Why is all kind of in that short TED Talk. And Simon Sinek talks a lot in his books, in his speaking, webinars, engagements, TED Talks, so on and so forth. He talks a lot about the importance of psychological safety in the workplace. One of his books is called Leaders Eat Last, and it's a lot of it is about leaders making you feel safe. So in today's episode, we're also going to get an assist from Simon Sinek, because I've got some quotes from him that are sprinkled throughout the episode. So the way we're going to attack this topic is, first of all, we're going to talk about why does psychological safety matter at school, and then 5 ways bosses make employees feel anxious, and most importantly then, 5 ways leaders make employees feel safe. So those will be the strategies that you can apply. You can assess how good of a job you're doing with this at your school. So let's jump in with why psychological safety matters at school. And we'll start with a quote from Simon Sinek. And he says, quote, "The responsibility of leadership is not to come up with all the ideas, but to create an environment in which great ideas can happen." And I think this is an interesting twist on why psychological safety is important. Now, we know that across all industries, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, that the number one thing employees want, salary is lower down the list. There's benefits are lower down the list. The number one thing across all industries that employees want at work is psychological safety. And that environment starts with one crucial ingredient, this environment that I'm talking about, where we don't have to come up with all the ideas. We have to create an environment in which great ideas can happen. It all boils down to psychological safety. And it isn't about being nice or being soft, or you'll hear about in the NFL, well, this guy's a player's coach, and the implication is that it's a pushover and it's someone who's just too nice and doesn't hold anyone to a standard. And I reject that. I don't believe that psychological safety is about that. In fact, I think it's the opposite, because usually that involves playing favorites. It involves a lot of unpredictability. If you have a handbook, and then will the leader enforce the handbook and hold people accountable or not? So that's not what it's about. It's about making sure that people feel safe to speak up. So I want you to pause, and I want you to think about your faculty meetings or your team meetings. And, there's that one or two teachers who they have good ideas, but they stay quiet. And maybe they stay quiet because they're introverted, but maybe they stay quiet because they've been interrupted one too many times, or that grumpy other teacher, I almost said older teacher, but that grumpy other teacher that their body language tells the whole tale. Well, it's not safe for them to speak up. They don't feel psychologically safe. And if we can create this environment, then the teachers are going to be more innovative because they're going to try things. It's going to feel safe to fail. It's going to be safe to be a human being. They don't have to be perfect. But if our teachers are anxious and guarded and afraid of consequences, or being excluded from social groups at school from teachers, if they don't feel safe, then they're not going to innovate. They're not going to try things. They're not going to collaborate. And then morale is going to plummet. And so psychological safety is incredibly important. I'm telling you something that you already know. But, it's not enough as leaders for us to give people a vision. We need to give them the safety to bring that vision to life. So I want you to hear that again. It's not enough to give the vision to our people. We have to give them the safety to bring that vision to life. There's so many good ideas. There's so much innovation and collaboration that's inside of our teachers. We need to make sure that we're creating a safe space for that to come out and to blossom. All right, so now I want to talk about 5 ways that bosses make people feel anxious. And I want you to go back in your mind to what we were talking about before when I asked you to think about, your first boss, or maybe think about one of your bosses that comes to mind that made you feel anxious. Well, why did they make you feel anxious? Well, I came up with 5 reasons. And the reason I want to talk about this is just to make sure that we check ourselves. I had a teacher who would like to say, check yourself before you wreck yourself. I think it's good to reflect sometimes on the negative and to make sure that that's not something that we're drifting into. And I think that we tend to do this when we get more stressed out. But number 1 on our list of 5 ways that bosses make the teachers feel anxious is to micromanage our teachers. So if a boss doesn't trust a teacher to make a decision, the message that they send with micromanagement is, I don't trust you and I don't think you're capable. I don't think you can handle this. And you're like, well, that's not really the message I'm sending. Okay. So I want you to think about something. I had a teacher who wanted to try something in algebra class, and it was called Bungee Barbie. And I don't really understand it, but some of you that are listening maybe are former math teachers, and they had Barbie dolls and rubber bands tied around Barbie's neck, and they were doing this thing over the stairwell railing, and then they had this thing and they were creating a scatter plot diagram, whatever that is. Some of you listening might know what that is. But this teacher, she wanted to do Bungee Barbie, and the kids loved it. She loved it. They had some actual very interesting results, and it was a very creative thing. And I just was like, this is super cool, and took some pictures and posted them on Instagram and then asked her about it afterwards. But I want you to imagine for a minute if the leader, the boss, had stepped in and been like, I don't know, that seems like they're probably going to make a lot of noise in the stairwell, and I don't know, parents are going to say we're playing with toys in school and that's not math and blah, blah, blah. And, it's like if at a school, the principal, the head of school, whatever, just keeps stepping in and keeps adjusting the plan and keeps demanding updates daily and then just keeps rewriting things that the person does, then creativity dies and the teacher shuts down and anxiety goes up. So I think that we probably in general do a good job of not micromanaging our teachers, but I just want to shine a light on that so that we can ask ourselves and make sure that that's not what we're doing, because creativity dies when micromanagement is occurring. Okay, the number 2 on our list of ways that bosses make people feel anxious is unclear expectation. So unclear expectations, again, you've heard me talk about that a bunch of times. Let's get an assist from a quote from Simon Sinek. Quote, when people are uncertain about their place or purpose, they fill in the blanks with fear, end quote. So let me give that to you again. When people are uncertain about their place or purpose, they fill in the blanks with fear. So that's pretty profound as far as I'm concerned, because there's another phrase that I saw. I don't think this was a quote from Simon Sinek, but it said, without clear vision and defined expectations, anxiety thrives. So why does that happen? Well, we think about our students and we think about predictability and support, and the predictability comes from classroom routines and rehearsing them until they become procedures, and then being consistent in making sure they follow the procedures. And if they don't, then we rehearse the procedure. And that seems like we're treating them like babies to some people. But really what it is it gives order in the chaos, and it gives predictability, and it lowers the anxiety of students. And as adults, we need the same thing. We need to know what's expected of us. The job description, the duties, and you're like, well, I mean, they have their teaching schedule, their duties are right on there, like that's what's expected of them. Okay. But is the employee handbook thorough and clear, and is it something that you hold the people, the teachers and the staff accountable to, Or is it just kind of a thing that exists? No one really knows where the link is or how to find it. And it's just sort of this vague thing when we refer to the handbook. So I just wanted you to pause and think about that for a minute and just remember that, again, our quote was, when people are uncertain about their place or purpose, they fill in the blanks with fear. Let's make sure they don't have any blanks to fill in. Okay. The third way that bosses make employees feel anxious is criticism without coaching. So if we're just going to point out the negative, we're not going to do it in a come alongside, guiding, coaching, growing kind of mindset, then we're going to cultivate a fear of failure on the part of our teacher. So let's think about a newer teacher, and maybe it's not you, maybe it's a division head, maybe it's an instructional coach, and maybe their personality is they get easily frustrated. Maybe not a great spot for them in your org chart if it's a person that gets easily frustrated, but I'll leave that to you. Here's the point. It's the mindset of want to help this person grow, but the way that they grow is through coaching and through guiding and growth and psychological safety and not being afraid that they're going to mess up all the time. And so speaking of coaching, let me apply this real quick. So all of us have been, most of us have been at a high school basketball game or a middle school basketball game, and the coach from the other team, hopefully it's not our team from our school, but the coach from the other team is one of these guys or gals that like to scream and yell. And you didn't box out, come on, get your head out of your rear end or whatever they might be yelling. And then someone comes out of the game and they're just really animated and upset, and the voice is raised and the face is red, and they're just telling the player, the athlete, all the things that they didn't do correctly. Okay, that's kind of a boss on the sidelines versus a leader on the sidelines. And I think leadership and coaching are so intertwined. It's like, okay, we can point out the mistakes so that we can learn from them, and here's what to do next time. But some of it is the delivery. Some of it is that I read recently with one of my coaching clients that they have a guideline in their school for positive comments to every negative comment towards colleagues and towards kids. And they try to stick to that goal. And so I'm not saying you need to track that. And it's just something to think about, that are we too critical? Because empathy is the first casualty of a chaotic day. Let me say that again. Empathy is the first casualty of a chaotic day. I don't remember where I heard that, but it's really, really true. And so our patience goes out the window. Coaching turns into criticism when we're stressed out and we're just putting out fires and being controlled by the tyranny of the urgent. And let's face it, that happens a lot. So we need to think about that. Okay. Number 4, the number 4 reason why bosses make people feel anxious is transactional relationships. So if we view people as resources and not human beings, I always say that we need to treat them like people first and employees second. That's a characteristic of servant leadership and excellent leadership. But when the staff feels like they're kind of like property, or that they're like the same as a desk or a computer or a smart board, if they're kind of feeling that, then they feel like they're not valued and they will disengage and you won't get the best out of that person. And so Simon Sinek says, quote, "Leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge." End quote. So that's one of his more famous quotes. And so the tricky part there is that sometimes we come up through the ranks as teachers and we then decide we want to be division heads or heads of school, but we don't get a whole lot of training in how to supervise other teachers. And so these relationships, we want them to be transformational, not transactional. And that makes people feel anxious. And then number 5 on our list of ways that bosses make you feel anxious would be inconsistent values or lack of integrity. So when a leader says one thing and does another, then trust is going to go out the window. And we were talking about how fear fills the gap when there's a lack of clarity. Well, I read in preparing for this episode a quote that says anxiety fills the gap left by hypocrisy. And so we try really, really hard not to be hypocrites. We try really, really hard to be consistent. We try not to have favorites. We try to implement the employee handbook and the student handbook fairly and consistently. But we're also human beings and we make mistakes. And so the key here is for you to just get clear about your integrity and your values, and to have your decisions be values-based and not situationally based. Because I had stretches in my career when my decisions were being based on the situation. How loud was the parent yelling? How stressed out was I? What was enrollment? Those kinds of things. And so consistency with our integrity and making decisions based on the values and the mission and the vision of the school, that is predictable and that feels safe. And when we don't do those things, it causes people to feel anxious. All right. So often I start with the bad news and then I give you the good news. So here's the good news. 5 ways that leaders create safety. So if bosses make you feel anxious and leaders make you feel safe, here's how you can help your teachers and staff to feel safe. Number 1, listen deeply. Okay, listen deeply. We talk a lot about listening on the podcast. Leaders need to make people feel heard, and not just with words, because we'll say, okay, first of all, that sounds hard, and things that I've talked about before, but with how present we are when we're listening. Simon Sinek says, quote, "The best leaders are the best listeners." And I tend to agree with that. Some of us lack patience when it comes to listening. Some of us, quite frankly, whether it's ADD or some other thing, it's just not a strength of ours and we get easily distracted. And when someone says something that isn't true, especially if this is a parent and we're just letting them vent and we're not interrupting, that's really, really hard. But when it comes to our teachers and making them feel safe, when they have something that they want to talk to us about, and we've decided that we're going to give them some time and then we're going to listen, I think that the smartphone is a big indicator of whether you're listening or not. And I get it, but also remember that in that meeting, however long it is, and hopefully it's not that long, there are other ways for people to get in touch with you. Maybe in your school you don't use walkie-talkies, and the way that people get in touch with you if it's an emergency is by texting or by calling. But I just feel like we have to remember the message that being on our phone while someone's telling us something sends to that person. So I'm not going to beat that horse to death, but I just want to mention that that's a factor. And then, of course, we want to listen deeply to our people to help create psychological safety. All right. Number 2, leaders make their employees feel safe when they admit their mistakes. So this is something that I did not do a very good job of early in my career because I was a young leader, I was an inexperienced leader, and I had imposter syndrome. And when you have imposter syndrome, you are probably not going to admit your mistakes or apologize and say, I got it wrong, and I'll try to do better. But real leaders that keep their people psychologically safe, can be vulnerable occasionally and accept responsibility. And think about this. When you say, I got it wrong, you're like inviting other teachers to take some risks or to take some chances. Do we want every teacher to play it safe in every lesson all year long? Now, I'm not talking about physical safety. I don't want them, doing things with fire and, all of the crazy stuff that maybe immediately came to your mind, but just a different way of doing things and having class outside, not in a way of blowing off class, but in a way of like actually engaging with the campus. And again, there's so many things that could come to mind when it comes to If a teacher took a couple healthy risks, let's call it that, a healthy risk, you could take the top off of the creativity at your school because you don't have all the ideas. I'm not a very creative person. I'm good at implementing other people's creative ideas with logistics and follow through and a plan. I'm not very creative. So let's tap into that creativity, but people need to feel like they're not going to get completely destroyed if they make a mistake. And if the leader admits and apologizes, then they're going to feel safer to do that. And Simon Sinek says, quote, "The courage of leadership is giving others the chance to shine even when it makes you look bad." So again, these are just thoughts to get you thinking and get you assessing your own practice and to maybe lean in a little more to the things that help people feel safe. All right, just a couple more. Number 3 on our list of how leaders help employees feel safe is that leaders share the why. And so you probably, if you know Simon Sinek and his work, you probably figured that I was going to get around to start with why, because that's what he's most famous for. And the quote that I chose was, "People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it." People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And of course, that's from his famous TED Talk, The Golden Circle. Start with why. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So how does that apply to us as leaders with our teachers and our staff? Okay, so if we explain our decisions from a why, a compelling why, big picture standpoint, then that helps to get our staff aligned with the purpose behind it. And sometimes I think that we announce things and we feel defensive, and then we feel like we don't need to over-explain. We don't need to tell them everything of how we got to this decision. I'm not saying that you need to do that, but give the compelling why behind why we're going to completely change the format for back to school night from what we did before. Why we're going to completely change the format for field day than what we did before, or fill in the blank. And I'm not saying it's just true with big things, but if you stop to think about it, there better be a strong why behind something, especially if we're going to change something. Usually there is. We're responding to changes in families. We're responding to changes in demographics or changes in culture or changes in spending habits, or the nimble school that's aware of what's going on, that adapts and changes and is flexible, is a school that's going to last. And so that all comes back to, if we're going to talk to our teachers, I think that the clarity surrounding the why behind what we're doing lowers the anxiety and helps them to feel safe. Okay, that brings us to number 4, how leaders help you feel safe as an employee is number 4, they invest in your growth. So I mentioned this before, kind of the opposite about criticism without coaching in the other list, but good leaders are going to be that coach or that mentor or that guide, and you're going to grow your people. And I just want you to hear this. I used to hold back on pouring myself into people, supporting their growth, especially if it involved getting certificates or getting degrees or this or that, because in my head I was feeling like, well, they're just doing that so that they can make their resume better so that they can leave and go get a job in the public school. And I'm ashamed to say that there have been times in my career when I really didn't lean into helping people grow because I was worried that they might leave. And I'm admitting that, and I'm sorry about that. And I'm sorry about those teachers that I didn't support in that time. But fortunately, I grew, and I figure, okay, I don't know how long they're going to be here, but for the time that they are going to be here, I want them to be their best. And then we're going to invest in their growth, and that's going to help them feel psychologically safe. And that brings us to number 5. And number 5 is called they create a circle of safety. And I want to talk about this idea of circle of safety for just a couple minutes, and then I'll wrap it up. So in his book, Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek introduces this idea of the circle of safety. And so let me just try to explain it by reading this quote and then giving a couple of examples. So he says, quote, "The goal of the leader is to create a circle of safety where people feel like they belong and are safe from the dangers inside the organization." So think of this idea of a circle. So in ancient times, there was the protective circle around the fire, the campfire. We're all together. We're close to the fire. We're going to protect each other from everything that's out there that's the danger. The danger comes from the outside. And then you know that in the pioneer days, the phrase circle the wagons, that's where that came from. Because if there was an attack, we're going to circle the wagons, and then we're going to get probably the women and children inside that circle, and we're going to fight the outside threat. But here's the problem. What if the threat is coming from inside that circle, with trust being at stake, or belonging being threatened, or psychological safety being inconsistent? And so we know about the external threats, like an upset parent, or changes in the economy, or how the public perceives private school education in general, or those kinds of things, external threats. But I think that the real breakdown in psychological safety happens when it comes from the inside, especially if it's a leader or boss that is the one that's creating this threat. So let me give you an example of what I mean. So let's say a parent emails you and demands that a teacher gets reprimanded because they're not answering emails fast enough. You know, you have this 24-hour policy, and they just aren't consistent in doing that. And so a boss just forwards that email from the parent to the teacher and says, "Please handle this," or "Please follow up with this parent." Boom, done. Okay, interesting. But what a leader would do is say to the parent first in the email or on the phone, "Okay, I'm going to look into this and then I'll get back to you." And then they're going to talk to the teacher privately, and they're going to be like, "Hey, what's going on? How can I support you with this?" And you're going to find out, is it disorganization? Is it that they have a bad attitude about parents? Or is it that this teacher who's also a parent has 3 kids under the age of 4 and an elderly parent who just moved in with them, and their life is just spiraling right now? That's what a leader does, is finds out. Now, I'm not saying that you're just going to never hold this teacher accountable to responding to parents within 24 hours if that's your policy. But as a leader, you're going to figure out a way to help them do it and still feel psychologically safe, feel that sense of trust, feel that sense of value. And that's what a circle of safety looks like in action. And here's the biggest problem is that if you don't have that circle of safety, then people are going to go into their room and shut the door and be in silos, or they're going to have unhealthy kind of competitions with each other as far as stupid stuff, or they're going to keep a little black book about who's coming in late or what she was wearing that day, or can you believe this or that. They're going to hide their mistakes. They're going to avoid hard conversations with parents because of the fact that they're pretty sure you don't have their back. And just this, if you don't have a circle of safety, like, the culture is gonna stink, quite frankly. And so you want to have a good culture, you want to have teachers who feel psychologically safe, and you want to elevate teachers to be their best, then we're going to lean into number 5, which is to create a circle of safety. That phrase that was coined by Simon Sinek. So let's talk about the big takeaways from today's episode. 5 ways that bosses make employees feel anxious. Number 1, micromanagement. Number 2, unclear expectations. Criticism without coaching. Transactional relationships. And number 5, inconsistent values or lack of integrity. And then 5 ways that leaders make employees feel safe is they listen deeply, they admit mistakes, they start with why, they invest in growth, and they create a circle of safety. And I like to end every episode with a call to action. And so your call to action is this week, I want you to take 10 minutes and just stop and think about whether your leadership is making your employees feel anxious or safe. And probably the answer is safe in most instances, but if there's an area where you think maybe it's making the teachers and staff feel anxious, then we're going to apply the things that we learned in the second list and improve that. So I want to ask you a quick question. Is it just me, or this past school year, did the parents at your school feel like they were more upset more often? And I just feel like we're going in that direction. And I just want you to imagine for a minute with you, all of your teachers at your school having much better proactive relationships with the parents at your school. And that would mean less problems making it to your desk because teachers built better partnerships with parents, more successful students because they're benefiting from these strong partnerships, higher retention rates, higher parent satisfaction scores on the parent survey, happier and less stressed teachers, happier and less stressed parents, happier and less stressed you, quite frankly. And I've seen that Parent Academy could be a game changer in other schools, and it can be a game changer for you and your teachers. And just another reminder that lots of private school leaders are picking up Parent Academy to use those 2 45-minute PDs to kick off the year so that everyone's on the same page and they're building their skills in that area. And so you can check that out at theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And then a final reminder about the 5 strategies to help you work with difficult parents, just a free gift full of tools and strategies. And you can get that over at theprivateschoolleader.com/parents. And I would really appreciate it if you would share this with another leader in your life or a rising leader in your school. And we're getting the word out there just so that they can hear this content. I'd also love to hear from you. Maybe you have 2 seconds to think at this time of year. mark.o.minkus@gmail.com is my email address, and I'd love to hear about a strategy that you found helpful, or maybe what your biggest pain point was during this past school year, and maybe turn that into an upcoming episode. The show notes for today's episode will be at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 138. And if you would write a review and a rating wherever you listen to this podcast, I'd really appreciate it. And that helps the algorithm push this out as suggested content to private school leaders all over the world. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I appreciate you so much and all your hard work that you're doing for the lucky kids and teachers at your school. Thank you for taking time, some of your precious time, to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.